Hello, in this presentation we're looking at Gair and Karunatillake, lesson 1, and this is part 2. In this lesson we're going to look at the relative pronoun yo, which, that's the nominative masculine singular, and the accusative form of that, which is yam, and also we're going to be looking at the first line of item 3 on page 1. For an explanation of yo and yam, we can look at the almost exact equivalents in English as who and whom. The differences, of course, one difference is that who in English is both an interrogative, who's there, and it's also a relative, the person who is doing so. Here the yo is just relative. The interrogative, by the way, is ko and kim rather than yo and yam. In English, we distinguish between who and whom. If who is the subject of a verb and whom is the oblique, that's the object of a verb, or with a preposition in front of it. To give an example in English, because now Sanskrit and Pali exactly reflect this, you say, those whom I am teaching. Whom, it's whom because it's the object of the verb teaching. Those whom I am teaching. And if you say, and whom, O teacher, will you teach? The teacher will say, I will teach those who want to learn. Not whom want to learn, but who want to learn, because who now is the subject of the verb want. And it's exactly the same in Sanskrit and Pali, but with a deviation that you sometimes get in Pali, which is in fact dealt with in this lesson. I'm going to take you now to, jumping ahead to page 11. If you look at further readings 1, you see, Naham bhikkhave anyameka dhammampi samanupassami yo evam saddhammassa sammosaya antradhanaya samvartati, and so on. The verb samanupassami, I detect, I observe. Anyam ekadhammam, accusative, I observe one single thing. Yo evam samvartati, which thus leads, which thus conduces. Yo, because it's the subject of the verb samvartati, and that's how it should be, and that's how it's done in Sanskrit. Now, look back to page 1, reading 2, the sentence that begins here, Naham bhikkhave anyameka dhammampi samanupassami yam evam adantam, and so on, samvartati. That actually is an anomaly. It would not be permitted in Sanskrit. It's like confusing when to say who and when to say whom. This anomaly is dealt with in footnote 5 on page 12, which says, note that although the relative pronoun generally takes the case proper to its function in its own clause, in other words, those whom I am teaching, and I am teaching those who want to learn. In other words, who and whom there, dictated by whether it's the subject of a verb or the object of a verb. This is what it means, the case proper to its function in its own clause. As stated in this grammar for to, it is sometimes attracted to the case of the noun to which it refers in the main clause. So in English, I am teaching him who wants to learn, correct? If I said I am teaching him whom wants to learn, that's incorrect. but Pali sometimes does it by attraction. Him, whom. Him, say, accusative, whom, also accusative. It's an anomaly. As I say, Sanskrit would not allow it, but it's occasionally done. Now look at note 4.2 in the grammar. That's the note in the second half of page 8. And it gives the example, I'm pointing here, Anyam egadhammam yam evam samvattatiti. You see, that's where the slightly irregularly, anomalously, the yam is used. He then goes on to say, note that the relative pronoun generally takes the case proper to its function, okay, who, whom, as in English, your, yum in Pali, in its own clause, as in the examples above. That may have puzzled you because the author has made a mistake here. It's not as in the examples above. The first example above is an example precisely of breaking the rule. So please note that that is an error. What the authors should have done is to refer to the example that we've just looked at on page 11. That's the first item under further readings 1. Says ekadhamampi samanupasami yo evam. That's the one he should have been referring to. So don't be thrown by this mistake. There's another mistake, by the way, here in I'm pointing to anyamekadham yena dhamma upajanti. That should be a double P. That's a straight misprint. Right, we'll now get back to our text, and we're back to page 1, item 3. And by the way, those of you who have Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation and the Wisdom publications, there's a translation of this section at page 116, starting at paragraph 306, bracketed 1. So, Michadiktikassa bhikkhave anupanna cheva akusala dhamma upajjanti upanna cha akusala dhamma ve pullaya samvattantiti. Let's analyze this sentence bit by bit. The subject of the sentence is dhamma, plural of dhammo. Here just means things, generally, phenomena. And the main verb is upajjanti. So dhamma, start off with dhamma upajjanti. Things, phenomena, arise. And I'll explain upajjanti. And it's the same uppad in Sanskrit, utpad, that we have, for example, in the paticca samuppada, the conditioned or dependent co-arising. It's from the Sanskrit root pad, very, very frequently used. This is really part of your core vocabulary here. That's the same pad that's cognate with our English word foot, and it's got the basic meaning of proceeding or going. And here, continuing with use in the Sanskrit form, makes it easier to understand the verbal prefix ut. In fact, it's originally an ud, but it becomes a t before a p. So utpad. This ut is actually cognate with our English out, but in Sanskrit and Pali has more the meaning of up, the idea of out and up. So utpad, going to arising, going, upgoing. By normal phonetic variation, the utpad of Sanskrit becomes uppad in Pali. Uppad. You'll see here uppajjanti, that's written now with a double J. This is a perfect example why we're really helped in the study of Pali by seeing what it was in Sanskrit, what it is in Sanskrit, because that just helps us to understand why we get this otherwise unaccountable double J appearing. Pad, the root pad, now when conjugated as a verb in Sanskrit, it's known as a fourth class verb. There are 10 classes of verbs. This is class 4, which doesn't go padami, padasi, padati, like the first class. This one adds a y in between. So, padyati. It adds this y in. Pali reflects that. So the padyati of Sanskrit becomes pajyati in Pali. That's by standard phonetic variation. So the Sanskrit utpadyati arises in Pali, becomes, oops, wrong pen, upajyati. Upajyati. And that J is double because we have almost always where you get a double consonant or a consonant cluster. When that phonetically transmutes in Pali, the result is almost invariably a double consonant. So this follows the rule that dya becomes a double j, upajyati. So dhamma upajyanti, phenomena arise, things arise. So what things arise? Akusala. Kusala has a general moral and practical tone of good, right, useful. And it's negated by prefixing an a to it. So akusala, how does he translate it here? Bad, inefficient, sinful. It's not quite the moral sinful. The basic meaning of it is just you're not doing it the right way. It's an inefficient way of doing it. We have, for example, skillful means. That's kusala upaya. Then by sandhi kusalo upaya. But it's kusala upaya, skillful means. So let's continue to use our traditional English Buddhist way of calling it skillful. So akusala dhamma upajjanti, unskillful things, unskillful dhammas arise. Now, anupanna akusala dhamma upajjanti. The anupanna, that's unarisen. I'll explain why. Okay, this should be a red pen, never mind. We had a few moments ago, utpad, to arise, which becomes uppad in Pali. You can make a past participle out of that. Normally, you make a past participle by adding a ta in Sanskrit, but it's often done by adding na instead of ta. We do the same in English, and the great majority of verbs we form up a past participle with an ed, but very often, very large number of common verbs, we do it with an en instead of written, driven, given. We don't say righted or drived or gived. It's written, driven, given. Sanskrit has a range of verbs which does exactly the same thing. So ut, pad, na. The dna, both in Sanskrit and Pali, will coalesce to become a double n. And of course the tpa in Pali but not Sanskrit will coalesce to become a double p. So that's why utpadyati, utpanna, arisen, Pali uppanna, and unarisen, not yet arisen, non-arisen is anuppanna. By the way, the prefix a, meaning not, before a vowel it becomes an, which is exactly the same as in Greek and exactly the same as we do in English. For example, aerobic, we don't say aerobic, but anaerobic. So the a and the an negating it. Sanskrit, Pali, Greek, English from Greek, we do that in exactly the same way. So anupanna, not yet arisen, or just unarisen. Anupanna cheva, cheva, cha eva, and indeed. So, and indeed. Anupanna akusala dhamma upajjanti. Unarisen, unskillful phenomena, or things, thoughts, mental formations arise. For whom do they arise? Or in whom do they arise? They arise in the micchadittikassa. A micchadittiko is a person with a wrong view. By the way, micchaditti, we know from the Noble Eightfold Path, sammaditthi, often translated as right view. Those who've been with me in earlier lessons will see there's a lot to this word samma, which has the idea not only of rightness and correctness, but of wholeness and harmonious, being whole in itself and in harmony with the environment that it's in. Samma. The opposite of samma is mithya. It's from the Sanskrit mithya, which is indeclinable, and it's used always, I think always, but certainly mostly, as a prefix meaning false. So, for example, mithyavada, false speech. By normal phonetic mutation, the tya of the Sanskrit becomes a ch. Notice doubled again, one letter here, another letter there, so doubled and aspirated. So this exactly follows the rules of phonetic transmutation, Sanskrit to Pali. So micha, indeclinable. That means it doesn't change its form, and it's, as I said, always put in front of a noun or an adjective. Ditti, we have ditti as view. So micchaditti, the opposite of sammaditthi, micchaditti means wrong view, false view. The meaning of the ga, micchadittika, means a person who has a false view. We do the same kind of thing in Greek and English as well. It's the adding an ik. If you suffer from sepsis, something has gone septic. Somebody addicted to alcohol is an alcoholic, and so on. Suffering from hypochondria, you don't put ik, just add a scene. You're a hypochondriac. It's the same k or ika or aka, Greek ikos. That means somebody characterized by that thing. Skepsis is doubt, and skeptical is somebody who doubts. Skeptikos in Greek, skeptic in English. Is that same ikos. So one who suffers from, or just is characterized by a false view, is therefore a micchadittika. It's in the genitive, micchadittikassa. In Pali, mostly the genitive and the dative have merged into one. In Sanskrit, it could have been either. Genitive or dative would have been right. So if it arises to somebody, in English when I say arises in somebody, they tend to say in Sanskrit, but it arises to you or it arises of you. That's why it's the genitive. Micchadittikassa, of or to a person with false view. Anupanna dhamma, anupanna akusala dhamma upajjanti. So in the person with a false view, these unarisen anupanna, false dhammas, false things, false phenomena, unskillful phenomena, akusala dhamma, unskillful phenomena, upajjanti, arise. And the bhikkhave, of course, is our irregular vocative plural, O monks. I think I explained in the last lesson, is bhikkhu, singular, monks, bhikkhu, you lengthen the u to make it monks. In the vocative, almost invariably, in the plural, the vocative is the same as the nominative. So you would expect to say, well, bhikkhu means monks in the nominative, therefore you'd expect bhikkhu, O monks, in the vocative. Bhikkhave is an irregular form, irregular for Pali. It's probably, almost certainly comes from one of the Magathi dialects spoken by the Buddha or those close to him at the time. But don't worry about that one. It is unique, either almost unique or unique. It's certainly by far the most common, so just learn that the vocative is bhikkhave, and you'll know what you need to know, everything you need to know now about that irregular vocative. So, having said that these anupanna akusala dhamma upajjanti, that these unarisen, unskillful phenomena arise, he then goes on to say, uppannacha akusala dhamma vepullaya samvattantiti, which means and arisen, that's already arisen, the uppanna, and the arisen akusala dhamma, the already present, already existing unskillful dhamma, vepullaya samvattanti, proceed or carry on samvattanti. Vepullaya is to increase. They proceed to an increase. In other words, they get bigger, they get worse. The samvattanti, it's from the root vrit in Sanskrit, meaning vrit, to turn, which we in Latin vert, invert, extrovert, turning one way or the other. In Sanskrit, vrit vartate, and that vartate in Pali becomes vattati. Don't worry about why it's an A there and an E there. That's a slightly complex thing that we can deal with another time. You don't need to know that. Just so vattati. Now, samvattati, what's the meaning of the sam there? Here it has kind of the same meaning as conducive, the con in conducive. The Latin ducere means to lead, where we get our English word duke from. And conducive, by adding the con, means leads you along, leads along with it. The idea of a coherent motion. So conducive. Samvattati, very exactly, I would say very exactly, conveys the idea of conduces, it conducts you along with it. So the false view, the possession of a false view is conducive, samvattati, to the arising of these akusala dhamma. You see in the vocabulary that vepulla, neuter noun, vepullam, is given as fullness or abundance. In both Sanskrit and Pali, there is the word vipula, meaning much, abundant, or full. You get a lot of abstract nouns formed in Sanskrit by, it's a little bit complex, you'll have to learn it in due course, by strengthening the first vowel and adding a ya instead of the a. So in Sanskrit, the I becomes an I by strengthening. And so vipula, vaipulya. Two changes there. The I becomes the I and the Y is added. That is their way, one of their ways, of making an abstract noun. So full, abundant, full or abundant adjective, vipula, and vaipulya, fullness or abundance. Now, Pali doesn't have this A, that becomes an E, just which we transliterate as the letter E, and now, as usual, this consonant plus to the lia becomes a double L. So vipula in Pali then makes the abstract noun vipulla, meaning fullness or abundance. So vipullaya is the dative of it. So vipullaya samvattanti. The akusala dhamma, the unskillful dhamma, unskillful phenomena, vipullaya samvattanti. Samvattanti, they proceed, they carry on, they conduce to an increase. In other words, unskillful dhammas go ahead and get increased. I'll just read that whole sentence again for you, in the hope that it might help. So, michadiktikassa bhikkhave anupanna cheva akusala dhamma uppajjanti. Uppanna cha akusala dhamma vepullaya samvartanti. So, michadiktikassa, to the person of wrong view, O monks. Unarisen, unskillful dhammas, things, phenomena, mental states, uppajjanti, arise, uppannacha akusala dhamma, and arisen, or already arisen, existing akusala dhamma, unskillful phenomena, samvattanti, proceed, conduce, take themselves along, conduct themselves, vepullaya, to abundance, to increase. Right, that's it for this presentation. I hope it's been useful. Thank you.